From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Wednesday, October 30. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese could have breached the ministerial code of conduct when he asked for Qantas flight upgrades worth tens of thousands of dollars. The PM says he hasn't done anything wrong. You can read that exclusive right now at theaustralian.com.au. Salmon farmers and conservationists have formed an unlikely union against Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek. They say she's skirting her job by delaying a decision on an endangered species found in Tasmania until after the next election. Australian government's COVID response impinged on Australians' human rights, damaged the mental health of children, exposed more women to family violence and contributed to inflation. Those are the stark findings from a report about how we can do it better next time there's a global pandemic. Today, how did we get it so wrong? Try not to shudder as I take you back to 2020.
Okay, I'm back.
People were making videos about their sourdough journeys.
And real briefly, just want to show you the results of my first bread from that sourdough that's just gone wild here.
Parents desperately tried to entertain bored kids.
I'm Jamie, and this is your place for yoga, stories and fun.
The supermarket became a hellscape.
Tensions flared at Woolworths Chullora around 7 o'clock this morning when 3 women became involved in a toilet paper tussle.
I just want one pack. No, not one pack. Call the police. I'm calling the police.
Politicians became even more unbearable than before.
You won't be able to go to the pub because the pub is shut. That doesn't mean you can have all your mates round to home and get on the beers.
And bureaucrats you'd never heard of started bossing you around.
This is a very serious topic, so please don't be distracted by that.
Most of us would prefer never to think about it again. But now the government's come up with a report ominously titled Lessons for the Next Crisis.
The striking conclusion, I think, from this report, though, is that right now we are arguably worse placed as a country to deal with a pandemic than we were in early 2020.
That's Health Minister Mark Butler releasing the report. Labor's creating a new Centre for Disease Control to try and ensure we do better next time. And there are 26 recommendations, including better ways to manage international borders, a national medical stockpile, clear agreement on how the Commonwealth, states and territories should interact, and to appoint a chief paediatrician to ensure children's rights are not neglected next time around. While Butler sought to present an air of reasonableness,
it is easy with the benefit of hindsight to second-guess decisions or criticise decisions that were made in the heat of the fight against a once-in-a-century pandemic.
Treasurer Jim Chalmers laid the blame squarely at the feet of Scott Morrison.
Big decisions were taken and big mistakes were made. Those mistakes were costly and they were inflationary.
The Treasurer's undertone here is the cost of living crisis isn't my fault. Look what I had to deal with.
We saw some very good ideas badly implemented and poorly targeted. Billions and billions of dollars were wasted. The views that we made public and clear at the time have been vindicated by this report.
The report was particularly harsh on state governments, saying border closures had very negative effects on food security, national supply chains and access to healthcare. We've used a voice actor to bring you some of the report's starkest findings. The report says the evidence suggests government responses had a devastating impact on kids, saying it was told
children's rights were deprioritised to support the public health response. This had significant long-term impacts that outweighed the risk to children and the wider community.
On people living in nursing homes who weren't allowed to see their families,
We heard that the restrictions made residents feel like second-class citizens without agency in the final years of their lives.
On disabled people in residential homes.
Denying family and carers access to these settings during lockdowns increased the risk of human rights breaches through forced isolation and reduced basic care.
And on people experiencing homelessness.
Local governments and community organisations moved quickly to implement programs to house in hotels those sleeping rough. These were highly successful programs that reduced risk for this key cohort through the pandemic. In addition, measures such as increased social security payments and eviction and rent rise moratoriums meant that rather than increasing, the number of households living in housing stress reduced through the pandemic. However, once supports were withdrawn, many people were in the same position as before the pandemic, if not worse off.
Australia's vaccine rollout was famously frustratingly slow. The report said that cost lives and hurt the economy.
The additional lockdowns that occurred as a result of these delays had a direct economic cost estimated at $31 billion.
Here's what the report said about JobKeeper.
Some policy decisions, such as excluding temporary migrants and foreign companies from JobKeeper, exacerbated skills shortages and inflationary pressures during the economic recovery.
Australia's economy recovered much faster than the government expected, and the report says that meant supports like JobKeeper should have stopped earlier.
There was excessive fiscal and monetary policy stimulus provided throughout 2021 and 2022, especially in the construction sector. Combined with supply-side disruptions, this contributed to inflationary pressures coming out of the pandemic.
The report said the Home Builder Scheme, which gave eligible Australians a grant of $25,000 towards renovations or new home construction, was an example of a payment that didn't consider whether the industry could cope.
The Home Builder program created excess demand in an industry facing supply constraints. This has been a significant contributor to inflation coming out of the pandemic. And the program's focus on renovations rather than new builds added to the general housing shortages.
Coming up, why lockdown was particularly dangerous for people at risk of domestic and family violence. The description by the 3 inquiry chairs of what was going on inside some homes is chilling.
Risk factors associated with family, domestic and sexual violence increased through the pandemic. Some women were forced into lockdowns with their abusers. There was an increase in alcohol consumption, which is linked to higher rates of family violence. One important risk factor, financial stress, was reduced due to the increases in income support payments. A significant number of women and children experienced violence for the first time, and there was also an increase in the severity of violence during the pandemic.
This report didn't look at decisions made unilaterally by individual states or territories, like whether or not to shut down their school systems. But the authors make clear that lengthy school shutdowns are still affecting kids badly.
While the Australian Health Protection Principal Committee never recommended widespread school closures, a lack of early and clear communication on the risks undermined public confidence, particularly for parents with school-aged children, teachers and unions. This created the environment for subsequent state-based decisions to transition to remote learning that impacted the quality and accessibility of education throughout the pandemic.
You can read our experts' analysis of the COVID inquiry report, as well as all the nation's best news, sport and politics right now at theaustralian.com.au.